10 toughest actors in Hollywood history. They didn't just play tough guys on screen, they were tough guys in real life. The kind of men who could break your jaw with one punch and then finish filming the scene. Hollywood's most rugged stars weren't just acting when they portrayed heroes, fighters, and warriors. Many lived lives just as dramatic and dangerous as their on-screen personas. These were real men who brought authentic grit to the silver screen because they'd already lived it. Today we're going beyond the Hollywood publicity stories to reveal the shocking truth about the 10 toughest actors in cinema history. Men who brought real-world courage, strength, and resilience to their roles. What makes number 4 on our list particularly jaw-dropping is that studio executives tried desperately to keep his background a secret for fear audiences wouldn't believe it was possible. But before we dive into today's fascinating Hollywood history, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below, letting us know where you're tuning in from. I read every comment and love connecting with fellow classic film enthusiasts around the world. Let's begin our journey with perhaps the most legitimately tough actor in Hollywood history, a man whose real-life exploits would seem unbelievable if they weren't so thoroughly documented. 1. Audie Murphy. When you think of Hollywood's tough guys, you might picture John Wayne or Clint Eastwood, but the toughest man to ever appear on the silver screen was a baby-faced, 5 feet 5 inches actor who looked so unthreatening that directors often had trouble casting him in action roles. Yet Audie Murphy was, without question, the most legitimately dangerous man in Hollywood history. Before becoming an actor, Murphy was the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. At just 19 years old, he single-handedly held off an entire company of German soldiers for an hour in France, then led a successful counterattack while wounded and out of ammunition. For this incredible act of bravery, he received the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration awarded by the United States government. But that was just one incident in Murphy's extraordinary military career. He earned every American Combat Award for valor available during his service, plus 5 decorations from France and Belgium. In total, Murphy received 28 military medals before his 21st birthday. His combat exploits included destroying multiple enemy tanks, repeatedly charging machine gun nests alone, and continuing to fight despite being wounded 3 times. Hollywood discovered Murphy when his heroics landed him on the cover of Life magazine. But directors initially struggled with casting him because he looked too young and innocent to be believable as a tough guy. Murphy's boyish appearance was so deceptive that when he arrived at the Hollywood studio for his first screen test, security guards initially refused to believe he was the war hero they'd been expecting. The irony is that Murphy, despite his unassuming appearance, was arguably more lethal than any other actor who ever stood before a camera. Military historians have estimated that Murphy personally killed between 240 and 300 enemy soldiers during his service, more than many entire military units. Perhaps most remarkable was Murphy's unflinching portrayal of himself in the autobiographical war film To Hell and Back. In one of Hollywood's most meta moments, the real-life war hero reenacted his own battlefield exploits, yet had to tone down some of his actual achievements because producers feared audiences would find the truth too far-fetched. Director Jesse Hibbs later revealed, "We had to leave out some of Audie's actual feats because no one would have believed them." Murphy suffered from severe PTSD after the war, sleeping with a loaded pistol under his pillow and battling nightmares that often left him waking up in a cold sweat, reaching for a weapon. His second wife, Wanda Hendricks, once said, "Audie had 2 completely different sides. In public, he was shy, soft-spoken, and gentle, but I've seen him wake up from nightmares and become someone I didn't recognize. A hardened killer with instincts that frightened me." Despite his inner demons, Murphy maintained remarkable self-control throughout his Hollywood career. Only once did his combat instincts surface publicly, when a businessman made threatening moves during a heated argument. According to witnesses, Murphy's reaction was so swift and threatening that the man later said, "I suddenly realized I was looking into the eyes of someone who could kill me without hesitation. It was the most terrifying moment of my life." What makes Murphy's story particularly remarkable is that unlike many on our list, he never sought to be a tough guy on screen. He actually preferred comedic and romantic roles where he could escape his violent past. Yet behind his gentle demeanor was a man who had faced more real combat and personally dispatched more enemies than perhaps any other professional actor in history. 2. Charles Bronson. Before he became one of cinema's most iconic tough guys, Charles Bronson lived a life of grinding hardship that would have broken most men. Born Charles Bukinski, he grew up in abject poverty as one of 15 children in a Pennsylvania coal mining family. By age 10, he was already working in the mines to help support his family, spending his formative years in the darkness hundreds of feet below ground. When speaking of his childhood, Bronson rarely elaborated, but once said simply, "I suppose I'm attracted to these roles because of my background." I was raised in violent neighborhoods and saw killing firsthand. We lived with death, starvation, and misery. What many don't realize is that the signature Bronson appearance, the weathered face, the suspicious squint, the perpetual grimace, wasn't an act at all. These were the physical manifestations of a man who had spent his early years breathing coal dust in near darkness and fighting for survival in violent neighborhoods where showing weakness meant you wouldn't last long. But Bronson's real trial by fire came during World War II. As a B-29 aerial gunner in the Army Air Forces, he flew 25 combat missions over Japan and received a Purple Heart for wounds sustained in battle. Colleagues from his military days described him as unnervingly calm under fire and the kind of man you wanted next to you when things went bad. After the war, Bronson's path to stardom was anything but easy. He worked over 50 different jobs, including onion picker, short order cook, and professional boxer, while pursuing small acting roles. Even after securing more regular acting work, directors often cast him as thugs, convicts, and Native Americans, despite his Lithuanian heritage, because of his naturally intimidating appearance. What separated Bronson from other tough guy actors was that while many performed their own stunts, Bronson performed his own fights, and he fought like someone who actually knew how violence worked. Film historian Eddie Muller noted, "When Bronson throws a punch on screen, it doesn't look choreographed. It looks like a man who has been in real fights and knows how to hurt someone efficiently." His co-stars often commented on his surprising physical strength. Despite standing only 5 feet 9 inches, Bronson maintained the powerful build of a former laborer and boxer. Jan Michael Vincent, who worked with him on The Mechanic, recalled, "During a scene where he was supposed to just grab my shirt, I could feel the incredible strength in his hands. This wasn't an actor pretending to be strong. This was genuine power developed through years of hard labor." Perhaps most telling about Bronson's authentic toughness was his response to death threats from the Mafia after his portrayal of vigilante Paul Kersey in Death Wish. While the studio offered him bodyguards, Bronson reportedly declined, saying simply, "I've lived too long and been through too much to worry about people like that." Unlike other stars who might have sought protection or publicity from such threats, Bronson's response demonstrated the quiet confidence of a man who had faced far worse dangers. Director Michael Winner, who worked with Bronson on numerous films, once said, "Charles doesn't act tough. He simply is tough. There's a substantial difference. Most actors playing tough guys are gentle souls playing a role. Bronson had an authentic hardness that came from a life of genuine struggle and danger. You can't fake that kind of authenticity." 3. Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin didn't just play intimidating characters. He was precisely the kind of dangerous man he often portrayed on screen. Before he became one of Hollywood's most recognizable tough guys, Marvin served as a Marine during World War II, where he participated in some of the bloodiest fighting in the Pacific Theater. As a private first class with the 4th Marine Division, Marvin fought in the Battle of Saipan in 1944, where he was severely wounded by machine gun fire that severed his sciatic nerve. The injury hospitalized him for a year and left him with a permanent limp that he disguised throughout his acting career. For his service and injuries, Marvin received the Purple Heart Medal, though he rarely spoke about his military experiences in detail. When he did discuss his time in combat, Marvin was bracingly honest about its horrors. Unlike some actor veterans who romanticized their service, he once said, "I was a Marine sniper in the Pacific. I got shot in the ass and sent home. That's the truth. Any man who says he enjoyed combat is either a liar or a fool." This authenticity made Marvin uniquely qualified to portray violence on screen. Director John Boorman, who worked with Marvin on Point Blank, noted, "Lee understood violence in a way most actors never will. When he portrayed a violent man, there was a truth to it that came from having seen men kill and be killed. He knew how real violence worked, swift, ugly, and without the dramatics you usually see in film." Marvin's military background gave him a perspective on screen violence that other actors lacked. In films like The Dirty Dozen and The Killers, his portrayal of violent men had a chilling authenticity precisely because he wasn't playing at being dangerous. He was drawing on real experiences from combat. His fellow actors often found themselves intimidated by Marvin both on and off screen. James Coburn, himself known for tough guy roles, once said, "When Lee walked onto a set, there was an immediate shift in the atmosphere. Everyone straightened up a bit. There was something genuinely dangerous about him that you couldn't quite put your finger on, but you definitely felt it." Perhaps the most telling indicator of Marvin's authentic toughness was his infamous bar fight with an entire team of lumberjacks while filming in Oregon. According to multiple witnesses, Marvin, well into his 40s at the time, held his own against several much younger men until the state police arrived. The next day, he showed up to set on time, sporting bruises, but refusing medical attention or any schedule adjustments. What made Marvin particularly fascinating was his combination of physical toughness and intellectual depth. Despite his hard-drinking, hard-fighting reputation, he was well-read and thoughtful about his craft. Director Samuel Fuller, who worked with Marvin on The Big Red One, said, "Lee had experienced the worst of humanity during the war, and that gave him a philosophical outlook you wouldn't expect. He could be discussing Ernest Hemingway one minute and demonstrating the most efficient way to disable an opponent the next." In an era when many action stars were merely playing at being tough, Lee Marvin brought the real thing to the screen. A combat-hardened Marine who had faced death and carried those experiences into every role he played. As film critic Roger Ebert once observed, when Lee Marvin threatens someone in a movie, you believe it because Lee Marvin could actually carry out that threat. 4. Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen wasn't just Hollywood's king of cool. He was a legitimate daredevil whose off-screen adventures often outshined his movie roles. Unlike some tough guy actors who relied on careful publicity and stunt doubles, McQueen insisted on performing his own stunts whenever possible and lived a life of genuine risk and adventure. McQueen's path to toughness began early. After an unstable childhood marked by abandonment and abuse, he ran away from home at 14 and eventually joined the United States Marine Corps in 1947. His time in the military was hardly smooth. He was demoted 7 times for insubordination and once spent 41 days in the brig for extending a weekend pass into a 2-week absence. Yet despite his rebellious nature, McQueen ultimately shaped up and even saved the lives of 5 other Marines during an Arctic exercise when their tank broke through ice into the sea. After his honorable discharge, McQueen drifted through various jobs, including lumberjack, oil rigger, and carnival barker, before finding his way to acting. But unlike many actors who leave their adventurous past behind once they find success, McQueen continued pushing physical boundaries throughout his career. His passion for motorsports wasn't just a hobby, it was an obsession that frequently put his life and career at risk. McQueen competed professionally in both motorcycle and auto racing, often using pseudonyms to prevent film studios from stopping him. During the filming of The Great Escape, McQueen performed all of his own motorcycle stunts, except for the famous fence jump, which the studio's insurance companies simply wouldn't allow. What many don't realize is that McQueen's racing wasn't just for show. He competed against professional drivers and often placed highly. In the 1970 12 Hours of Sebring race, one of the most prestigious endurance races in the world, McQueen and his co-driver Peter Revson finished second overall, despite McQueen racing with a cast on his foot from a motorcycle accident weeks earlier. His longtime stunt double and friend Bud Ekins once said, "Steve wasn't playing at being a racer or a tough guy. He was genuinely both. I've known professional racers who weren't as skilled or as gutsy as Steve was on a bike or in a car." McQueen's willingness to put himself in genuine danger extended to his film work. During the filming of The Sand Pebbles, he insisted on performing a dangerous river scene himself, nearly drowning when he was caught in a surprisingly strong current. On The Towering Inferno, he performed stunts with real fire that even experienced stuntmen considered extremely hazardous. Director John Sturges, who worked with McQueen on The Great Escape and The Magnificent Seven, noted, "The problem with Steve wasn't getting him to do dangerous stunts. It was trying to stop him from doing the ones that were truly life-threatening. He had absolutely no fear, which made him both incredible to work with and terrifying to ensure." Perhaps most telling about McQueen's authentic toughness was his response to learning that he was on Charles Manson's hit list. When informed by police that the Manson family had planned to target him, along with other celebrities including Frank Sinatra, McQueen began carrying a loaded Magnum pistol everywhere he went. Unlike other stars who hired extensive security teams, McQueen's approach was straightforward. He would protect himself. Racing champion Mario Andretti, who competed against McQueen, once observed, "Hollywood had a lot of actors playing tough guys, but Steve actually was what most of them were pretending to be. The man had more guts on the track than some professional drivers I knew." 5. Kirk Douglas. Before he became one of Hollywood's biggest stars, Kirk Douglas, born Isser Danielovich, fought his way up from extreme poverty through sheer force of will. The son of Jewish immigrants, Douglas grew up in a home so poor that his family sometimes went without food. He earned his first money, a few pennies, by selling snacks to mill workers, developing the hustle and determination that would eventually take him to Hollywood. But Douglas didn't just battle poverty. he channeled his hardscrabble upbringing into becoming a legitimate wrestler. Before his acting career, Douglas wrestled competitively and earned a scholarship to St. Lawrence University based on his wrestling prowess. This wasn't theatrical wrestling, but legitimate collegiate competition that required genuine strength, skill, and toughness. Douglas's real trial by fire came during World War II, where he served as a communications officer aboard a submarine chaser in the U.S. Navy. Military service in anti-submarine warfare was extraordinarily dangerous, with constant threat of enemy attack and the psychological strain of operating in the confined spaces of a small war vessel. Douglas received injuries during his service that led to his medical discharge in 1944. What separated Douglas from other tough guy actors was his combination of physical power and indomitable will. Director Stanley Kubrick, who famously clashed with Douglas during the filming of Spartacus, later admitted, "Kirk was an absolute force of nature. When he decided something was going to happen, it happened. Period." His physical strength was impressive, but his mental toughness was truly intimidating. Douglas's reputation for toughness was well earned on movie sets. For the filming of Spartacus, he trained intensively with ex-gladiators and wrestlers to ensure that the fighting scenes would look authentic. During one scene, Douglas insisted on performing a dangerous fall that the stunt coordinator had advised against, resulting in injuries that would have sidelined most actors, but from which Douglas returned to filming after just 2 days. His co-stars frequently commented on both his physical power and his intimidating presence. Burt Lancaster, himself known for his athletic background as a former circus acrobat, said of Douglas, "Kirk approaches acting like a physical confrontation. He doesn't just perform a scene, he attacks it." Perhaps most telling about Douglas's genuine toughness was his recovery from a severe helicopter crash in 1991 that killed 2 other people and left him with a debilitating back injury. Though in his 70s at the time, Douglas fought through a lengthy and painful rehabilitation process, eventually regaining his ability to walk. Then, after suffering a severe stroke in 1996 that severely impaired his speech, Douglas underwent years of therapy and published a book about his recovery, a testament to his unyielding determination. Director Howard Hawks, who worked with many of Hollywood's tough guys, once observed, "There were plenty of actors who looked tough, but Kirk actually was tough. The difference was in the eyes. You could see that this was a man who had fought his way through life and wasn't intimidated by anything or anyone." Douglas himself rarely discussed his toughness, but in his autobiography, he offered this insight. "I've always believed that you tell a person no 3 times. Then, if they're still standing there, you might have to hit them." It was a philosophy that reflected his straightforward approach to confrontation, one developed through real struggles rather than Hollywood posturing. 6. James Cagney. Don't let the compact 5 feet 5 inches frame fool you. James Cagney was pound for pound one of the toughest men ever to become a Hollywood star. Long before he became famous for playing gangsters and tough guys, Cagney had developed legitimate fighting skills through necessity in his rough New York neighborhood. Growing up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, Cagney learned to box not as a sport, but as a survival skill. The streets where he was raised were ruled by gangs, and being small meant Cagney had to be tougher and quicker than his opponents. He became an accomplished amateur boxer, developing the rapid footwork and lightning-fast hands that would later become part of his signature on-screen style. What most audiences didn't realize when watching Cagney's famously realistic fight scenes was that they were seeing a man who had been in dozens of real street fights and knew exactly how violence worked in the real world. Unlike the theatrical, drawn-out brawls that characterized many Hollywood films, Cagney's fights were quick, brutal, and efficient, just like actual street confrontations. Director Raoul Walsh, who worked with Cagney on several films, including White Heat, once commented, "Jimmy knew how to throw a punch better than any actor I ever worked with because he'd thrown plenty of real ones in his day. When he hit someone in a scene, you believed it because there was authentic technique behind it." Cagney's physical abilities extended beyond fighting. He was an accomplished dancer before becoming an actor, with remarkable coordination and agility that allowed him to perform his own stunts well into his later career. His dance background gave him the unique ability to move with both grace and explosive power, a combination that made his violent scenes particularly convincing. His co-stars often discovered Cagney's surprising strength the hard way. During the filming of The Public Enemy, actress Mae Clarke wasn't told in advance that Cagney would actually shove a grapefruit in her face rather than fake it, resulting in genuine shock and minor injury. This wasn't the only time Cagney's realism caught co-stars off guard. He was known for occasionally connecting with stage punches that weren't entirely staged. Perhaps most telling about Cagney's authentic toughness was his reputation off the set. Despite his fame playing criminals, Cagney was known in Hollywood circles as someone you simply didn't cross. Bob Hope once remarked, "Jimmy was the kind of guy who, if you tried something funny with him, would drop you where you stood and then help you up and dust you off afterward." Cagney himself rarely discussed his fighting abilities, but when pressed in a 1973 interview, he offered this telling insight. "I know how to handle myself. Always have. When you're my size and grow up where I did, you either learn to be handy with your fists, or you get used to being on the ground a lot. I preferred standing." 7. John Wayne. John Wayne's tough guy persona wasn't just a creation of Hollywood publicity, it was rooted in genuine physical prowess and frontier hardship that preceded his acting career. Before he became Duke Wayne, Marion Morrison was raised in the sparse, demanding environment of early 20th century California and Iowa, where physical labor was a daily reality. Standing 6 feet 4 inches and powerfully built, even in his youth, Wayne initially distinguished himself not as an actor, but as a football player, earning a sports scholarship to the University of Southern California. His strength and athletic ability were so impressive that during his early days in Hollywood, he worked as a prop man and stunt man before landing acting roles, routinely moving set pieces that took 2 or 3 other men to handle. What many don't realize about Wayne is that he actually performed many of his own stunts well into middle age, taking physical risks that would be unthinkable for stars of his stature today. During the filming of The Alamo, Wayne insisted on performing a dangerous horse fall that resulted in cracked ribs. Rather than take time off to recover, he simply had his ribs taped and continued directing and starring in the film. Director John Ford, who worked with Wayne on numerous classics, once said, "Duke's toughness isn't an act. I've seen him work 14-hour days in desert heat that sent half the crew to the hospital for heat exhaustion, then get up the next day and do it again without complaint. He's made of something different than most men." Wayne's physical resilience was perhaps most evident during the filming of The Conqueror in 1956. The production took place in Snow Canyon, Utah, downwind from Nevada nuclear test sites, exposing the cast and crew to radioactive fallout. Of the 220 people who worked on the film, 91 developed cancer in the following decades, including Wayne himself, who eventually died of stomach cancer in 1979. Yet despite eventually developing health problems likely connected to this radiation exposure, Wayne continued to perform physically demanding roles for decades. His personal strength was matched by remarkable pain tolerance. During the filming of The Greatest Story Ever Told in 1965, Wayne tore his shoulder ligaments in a stunt but refused to stop filming. His co-star Max von Sydow later recalled, "I witnessed John injure himself quite badly, but he simply had it bandaged during lunch and returned to complete the scene. There was no question of him stopping. It simply wasn't in his nature." Perhaps most telling about Wayne's real toughness was his battle with cancer. After having a lung and several ribs removed due to cancer in 1964, Wayne returned to performing his own stunts in The Sons of Katie Elder just months later, a decision that shocked his doctors and fellow cast members. Director Henry Hathaway said, "After his surgery, I tried to convince Duke to use a stunt double for the rough scenes. He just looked at me and said, 'Either I do my own stunts or you get someone else for the part.' That was the end of that conversation." While Wayne's off-screen politics have become controversial over time, even his harshest critics acknowledged his physical courage and endurance. Actor Kirk Douglas, who worked with Wayne despite their political differences, once observed, "Disagree with his views all you want, but don't question the man's toughness. I've seen him work through conditions that would send most men to the hospital. Whatever else he was, John Wayne was genuinely as physically tough as the characters he played." 8. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum's legendary cool on screen wasn't an act. It was the natural demeanor of a man who had survived genuine hardship, violence, and even prison before becoming a Hollywood star. Unlike many actors who simply played tough guys, Mitchum had lived a life that made his screen personas seem tame by comparison. Orphaned at a young age, Mitchum spent his youth as a Depression-era hobo, riding the rails across America and taking whatever work he could find. During this period, he worked as a ditch digger, coal miner, and professional boxer, developing both the powerful physique and the world-weary outlook that would later define his screen presence. His boxing career was brief, but legitimate. Fighting under the name Jimmy Mitchum, He competed in local matches as a teenager, developing genuine fighting skills and the distinctive broken nose that would become part of his rugged screen appearance. Unlike some actors who claimed boxing backgrounds, Mitchum had actually taken and delivered real punches. Perhaps most significant in shaping Mitchum's authentic toughness was his time on a Georgia chain gang after being arrested for vagrancy as a teen. This brief but brutal experience gave him first-hand knowledge of a harsh world that most Hollywood tough guys only pretended to understand. What separated Mitchum from other screen tough guys was his complete lack of bravado. Director Edward Dmytryk, who worked with him on Crossfire, once observed, "Bob never had to prove how tough he was. He simply was tough, and everyone around him could sense it." There was an authentic danger to Mitchum that couldn't be faked. His co-stars frequently commented on Mitchum's surprising physical power despite his relaxed demeanor. During the filming of The Night of the Hunter, director Charles Laughton was startled by Mitchum's strength when the actor easily carried actress Shelley Winters for take after take of a physically demanding scene without showing any strain. Mitchum's genuine toughness occasionally surfaced off-screen. When he was arrested for marijuana possession in 1948, a major scandal at the time, Mitchum served 60 days in prison with the same cool detachment that characterized his screen performances. Rather than being destroyed by a controversy that would have ended many careers, Mitchum emerged from the experience with his reputation for unflinching toughness enhanced. Perhaps most telling about Mitchum's authentic nature was his candid assessment of acting itself. Unlike many stars who spoke reverently about their craft, Mitchum famously said, "Look, I have two acting styles, with and without a horse." This wasn't false modesty, but rather the perspective of a man who had experienced enough real drama in his life to recognize the relative unimportance of pretending on camera. Director Joseph von Sternberg, known for his demanding perfectionism, once said of Mitchum, "There are actors who create characters and actors who reveal themselves. Mitchum did the latter. The hardness you see on screen isn't acting. It's the accumulated experience of a difficult life, visible in every expression." When asked about his seemingly effortless portrayal of tough guys, Mitchum offered this insight: "I kept the same expression for 40 years, and it worked just fine." What he didn't add was that the expression, combining world weariness, latent danger, and cynical intelligence, wasn't created for the camera, but had been developed through real experiences long before he ever stood before a movie camera. 9. Anthony Quinn. Anthony Quinn's powerful presence on screen wasn't crafted in acting classes. It was forged through a childhood of grinding poverty and physical labor that gave him both the physique and the hardened outlook of a genuinely tough man. Born in Chihuahua, Mexico during the Mexican Revolution, Quinn's earliest memories included soldiers, gunfire, and his family's desperate flight to escape the violence. After emigrating to the United States, Quinn's family settled in the poorest sections of Los Angeles, where young Anthony began working before he was 10 years old. Unlike many actors who developed their physiques in gyms, Quinn built his powerful frame through years of genuine labor, working as a butcher's assistant, a boxer, and in various construction jobs before ever stepping onto a movie set. His boxing career, though brief, was legitimate. Fighting professionally as a teenager to help support his family, Quinn developed not just fighting skills, but the distinctive broken nose that would become part of his rugged screen appearance. This wasn't a publicity stunt or a hobby. It was economic necessity for a young immigrant trying to survive. Quinn's physical power was legendary on movie sets. During the filming of Zorba the Greek, the famous beach scene required Quinn to carry logs that normally would have required 2 men. Rather than use camera tricks or doubles, Quinn simply performed the feats of strength as written, impressing even the local Greek laborers who worked as extras on the film. Director Elia Kazan, who worked with Quinn on Viva Zapata, once observed, "Tony doesn't act tough. He simply is tough. There's an authentic physical power to him that comes from years of real labor, not from workouts with personal trainers. When he portrays a laborer or a fighter, he's drawing on actual experience." Perhaps most telling about Quinn's genuine toughness was his approach to stunts and physical scenes. Well into his 50s and 60s, Quinn insisted on performing physically demanding sequences himself, often to the concern of directors and insurance companies. During the filming of The Guns of Navarone, at age 46, Quinn performed a treacherous cliff-climbing sequence that the stunt coordinator had recommended be done with a double. What made Quinn particularly unique among Hollywood's tough guys was his complete lack of concern about maintaining a macho image. Unlike many actors who carefully cultivated their tough personas, both on and off screen, Quinn was comfortable showing vulnerability and emotion. This confidence in his own masculinity, the ability to cry on screen without fear of appearing weak, came from a man who had nothing to prove about his toughness. Co-star Sophia Loren, who worked with Quinn on several films, once said, "Anthony had the body of a warrior and the soul of a poet. He could lift you with one arm and then discuss art with a sensitivity that would surprise people who only knew his tough roles. That combination made him absolutely magnetic on screen and off." In his autobiography, Quinn offered this perspective on his approach to portraying physical characters. "I've played boxers, strongmen, and laborers because I understand their world. Before Hollywood, my hands were calloused from real work. I've carried real loads, thrown real punches, and felt real hunger. When I portray these men, I'm not pretending, I'm remembering." 10. Charlton Heston. Before he became known for his epic film roles and later political activism, Charlton Heston established his credentials as a genuinely tough individual through military service and a commitment to performing his own stunts that bordered on reckless. Heston's service during World War II wasn't the publicity creation that some actors enjoyed. He served as an aerial gunner in the Army Air Forces. Though typically modest about his service, Heston occasionally acknowledged the genuine danger, once saying, "When you're in a B-25 at 15,000 feet and people are shooting at you, it tends to focus the mind wonderfully." For the Ten Commandments, Heston worked in the Sinai Desert under brutal conditions that sent many crew members to the hospital with heat exhaustion and dehydration. The physical demands Heston placed on himself became legendary in Hollywood. For Ben-Hur, he spent months learning to drive chariots, suffering numerous injuries during the process. Rather than using a double for the famous chariot race, Heston performed the majority of the stunts himself, including a moment when he was nearly thrown from the chariot during a jump. Director William Wyler, not known for easy praise, said of Heston during Ben-Hur, "Chuck has a physical courage that's quite remarkable. Most stars of his stature would have insisted on doubles for what he put himself through." Perhaps most impressive was Heston's portrayal of Michelangelo in The Agony and the Ecstasy. To authentically depict the artist painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling, Heston spent hours each day with his arms raised above his head, resulting in painful muscle spasms and inflammation that required medical attention. When offered padding and more comfortable positions between camera shots, Heston refused, believing that the genuine discomfort would translate to a more authentic performance. His co-stars frequently commented on both his physical endurance and determination. Sophia Loren, who worked with Heston on El Cid, once observed, "Charlton would spend all day in a 70-pound suit of armor in the Spanish summer heat when most actors could barely manage an hour. He never complained, never asked for special treatment. There was something almost inhuman about his endurance." Beyond his physical toughness, Heston displayed remarkable moral courage throughout his career, standing up for his convictions regardless of potential career consequences. Whether marching with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1960s or advocating for gun rights in his later years, Heston consistently demonstrated a willingness to take unpopular stands and face the resulting criticism head-on. Director Franklin J. Schaffner, who worked with Heston on Planet of the Apes, offered this assessment. "Many actors play heroes, but Chuck has the rare quality of actually embodying heroism. There's an authentic nobility and physical courage to him that can't be faked. When he portrays a character facing impossible odds, you believe it because Heston himself has that quality." And that wraps up our journey through Hollywood's legitimately toughest actors, men who brought real-life experience to their roles that modern stars can only attempt to simulate. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real stories behind these classic Hollywood icons, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content exploring the golden era of cinema. And I'm especially curious about your thoughts on this one. Which of these tough guys impressed you the most? Your perspective adds so much to these conversations about the legends we all cherish. Thank you for joining us for this look at the extraordinary men behind some of cinema's most iconic tough guy roles.